Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show that Garth Drabinsky does not want you to hear, but Jason Robert Brown definitely does. This is Monkeys and Playbills, and we're talking about Parade.
We are so thrilled. I'm Jillian Willems.
I'm Paul DeGurse.
And joining us today from Boston is our friend, Broadway intellect?
I would say basically Broadway historian, Elliot Lazar.
Elliot Lazar, welcome.
Oh, thank you for that warm welcome.
We're so excited.
This is Monkeys and Playbills, the show where we discuss Broadway musicals that had runs of 100 performance or fewer on Broadway, not counting previews.
And what the heck happened?
And today we're discussing Jason Robert Brown's Parade.
Previews began at the Vivian Beaumont Theater at Lincoln Center on November 12th, 1998. It officially opened on December 17th, 1998, and it closed on February 28th, 1999, after 39 previews and a valiant 85 performances.
I cannot believe this show is on our list. I was so surprised when I took a look at our list and saw that Parade was even an option for us to cover.
Yes.
I don't know about you guys, but I've always known of Parade as a very legendary musical, the first Broadway musical of this legendary, to my generation, Broadway composer, musical theater composer rather. And I'd known it by reputation, by its soundtrack, by the soundtrack of this cast.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I learned that it didn't even crack 100 performances in New York, that wasn't something I knew. I was very shocked.
It is very surprising. So, Paul, what was your first experience with Parade?
My first experience of Parade came as a young man, a young upstart little musician and musical theater aficionado of 17. I was in high school still, and it was March break, and my family had been planning on driving to Saskatchewan for March break, but a snowstorm, because we live in Winnipeg, prevented us from going. So I contacted a dear friend of mine saying, I'm not going to Saskatchewan, I've got a week off. Burn me CDs of two of your favorite musicals. I want to listen to two new musicals. And my friend burned me two CDs, one of Stephen Schwartz's Children of Eden and one of Jason Robert Brown's Parade.
Wow.
I spent the whole week off from school wandering around the suburban north end of Winnipeg, Garden City and the Maples.
Yeah, Garden City.
With my portable CD player and a pair of headphones and a CD booklet with two burnt CDs, switching back and forth between listening to Stephen Schwartz's Children of Eden and Jason Robert Brown's Parade. And I have a lot of fond memories of that, of a time when it just felt so cool to be listening and experiencing musical theater, not thinking about it as a business or about a career advancement or how, just enjoying it for the beautiful art that it was.
Mm-hmm.
When did you first hear Parade? When did Parade first come into your life?
Well, like so many teenagers that are obsessed with musical theater, I fell hard and fast for the music of Jason Robert Brown.
Oh,
yes.
And during one such deep dive, I found an anthology of his music that had been published, and I went through everything looking for songs that I could sing. As a 16, 17-year-old whose top end of the voice had yet to really develop, I was over the moon to find that there was a song called It's Hard to Speak My Heart that was right in my usable range. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to use this for everything. It's this amazing song. It's got falsetto in it. And I read, and the first page is there, and I thought, oh yeah, this is dramatic. I can feel like a real artist singing this. And then I get to the line, I never touched that girl.
Oh no.
And I thought, maybe not. Maybe we don't do this song. But that was my first entree into the music of Parade was, oh wow, this is yeah. Oh, maybe in a year or three. Yep.
Oh, wow.
And then correct me if I'm wrong, you did have the chance to actually play Leo Frank, right, Elliot, at Opera Nuova in Edmonton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did it in Edmonton back in 2016, where I was slightly more age appropriate for the role. Mm-hmm. It was a dream come true. It was the first thing I did, or one of the first things I did right after graduating. And what was cool was, I think a week before I flew to Edmonton, I found out that Brent Carver, who we'll be talking about later, was going to be there and with us in rehearsal and for the program for...
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was a crazy whirlwind adventure.
I cannot wait to talk a lot more about that experience and Brent Carver. But first, Jillian, when did you first hear Parade?
The first time I heard the whole soundtrack was 2 days ago.
No!
Oh my god.
Uh-huh.
We're taking our sweet time here, but it's just so good to be back. We just got back from a Christmas hiatus, a holiday hiatus.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels so friggin' good to be chatting with people again, to be talking about this stuff again. Let's get into it.
So, Elliot, I don't know if you know this, but there's a fun game we like to play on the pod where Paul and guest will try to give a synopsis of the show we are discussing, and then I follow it up with the actual synopsis, usually more concise.
I was going to say it's a bizarre thing this time because both Elliot and I were very familiar with this show going in already.
Mm-hmm. So what if we add another layer to this? Why don't you try to do the most concise synopsis you possibly can?
Yep.
And then we'll see how you did.
All right, as concise as possible. Parade is about a Jewish man who lives in the South who is wrongfully accused of murdering a young woman. And it's hard to be concise.
You're doing it though.
Antisemitism. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, anti-Semitism. But what about it?
Antisemitism in the Deep South causes him to be considered seriously as someone who could have committed this crime, even though there's not a ton of evidence pointing towards him. Mm-hmm. He ends up being found guilty, but his wife, up until now, him and his wife haven't had a super strong relationship. Mm-hmm. But his wife pursues justice and ends up getting the DA to reopen the case and get him acquitted. Mm-hmm. But then he's killed by an anti-Semitic mob. It is a true story of a really horrific part of history that led to the creation of the Anti-Defamation League.
Yeah, and the resurfacing of the once dormant Knights of the Ku Klux Klan.
That's right.
Not as good. I'm pro one of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, we like the ADL for sure.
Needless to say.
Absolutely. Yeah. How did I do? Elliot, did I miss anything important?
I think you hit all the major points. I mean, when I heard brief, I was gonna say like they got the wrong guy.
Yeah.
but that is more or less what goes on. Yeah, we have an essentially loveless marriage in Atlanta, Georgia, between a New York Jew and an Atlantan Jew, and the New York Jew is accused of the murder of a young woman, and is wrongfully accused and sentenced to death. And then when the sentence gets commuted to life in prison, thanks to his wife's work to do that, he gets abducted from the prison and lynched by a mob.
Yeah.
And it's a musical.
It's a tough pill to swallow. It's a hell of a story.
It really is. Made all the more horrific by the fact that it is true.
And it's a true story, yeah. Jill, if we were to look this up officially, what would the plot synopsis be?
Okay, so this one's directly from MTI, and this is very short and doesn't include some of the better details that the two of you included, but here it is. In 1913, Leo Frank, a Brooklyn-raised Jew living in Georgia, is put on trial for the murder of 13-year-old Mary Fagan, a factory worker under his employ. Already guilty in the eyes of everyone around him, a sensationalist publisher and a janitor's false testimony seal Leo's fate. His only defenders are a governor with a conscience and eventually his assimilated Southern wife who finds the strength and love to become his greatest champion. Yeah.
I mean, that's it. That's the show.
Absolutely. Let's talk about a little bit of history behind this show first, though, because as we're already kind of getting at, this is a very fascinating piece of theater. It's something you wouldn't expect to be a piece of musical theater, especially. Mm-hmm. It's a very important story, and it's a story with a lot to say, so you would think absolutely put this on stage. But to set it to music is something that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Mm-hmm. This is coming out of the late 80s, early 90s boom where both Stephen Sondheim has kind of just passed what I would say would be his peak as far as elevating musical theater.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a couple of mega musicals based on things that you also wouldn't necessarily expect to be musicals. Both Les Mis, based on a very long, hard-to-get-through French novel.
Yep.
And Cats, based on a series of poems. And those have both been just monster hits.
Mm-hmm.
And Live Ent, one of the producers of this, just had a monster hit a few years ago. Oh, and we're going to talk a lot about Live Ent. Just had a monster hit a few years ago with Brent Carver in Kiss of the Spider-Woman.
Mm-hmm.
Which is another very bizarre musical that just works. It works very well. Even though looking back on it and knowing that it really didn't hit in New York, it's very easy to say, well, yeah, you're trying to tell a really tragic story through an art form that you would typically associate with kick lines and chorus girls.
Mm-hmm.
If you actually consider the context of what is happening at this time, it makes a lot of sense. So much so that Stephen Sondheim was initially approached to write the music, approached by Hal Prince, who had been Stephen Sondheim's artistic partner in a lot of productions and had been a driving creative force in many of the productions I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Approached Stephen Sondheim about writing the music. Stephen Sondheim said, no, I just wrote Passions. I want to write something lighter. This is a future plug for our Passions episode, which is going to be a heck of an episode.
Oh yeah.
Because Passions is a heck of a show. And so instead, Hal Prince listened to his daughter, also a director, Daisy Prince, who said, I just directed a piece by this really young 24-year-old composer.
He was 24?
He was 24 when he wrote Parade. There's this young guy named Jason Robert Brown. I just directed a collection of his cabaret pieces, not even a book musical, a collection of his cabaret pieces called Songs for a New World. He's brilliant. Bring him on to be the composing driving force behind this enormous project that is adapting the Leo Frank trials into a musical.
Why did I think that Songs was after?
Nope. I believe... Am I correct, Elliot? It was Songs, then this, then Last 5 Years, as far as Jason Robert Brown goes?
Yeah. As a musical theater historian.
Yes.
Yeah. No, Songs for a New World came first, and then Parade was his first big Broadway show. And then I believe, Last 5 Years wasn't until I think 2002.
2 or 3, yeah.
Yeah. And then before that, Urban Cowboy might have also been a thing, which he contributed a song or two to, which was Broadway. But I think that was also in a couple years after Parade.
Before this, Jason Robert Brown has been a young 20-something working as a musical director, rehearsal pianist, and arranger on Broadway shows, including as the rehearsal pianist on Kiss of the Spider-Woman.
Okay.
And between that and Daisy Prince, Hal's daughter, being more connected to the indie Broadway scene and going, this guy's the real deal. That's how Jason Robert Brown got the gig.
And I was reading just before we got on today an old interview with Jason Robert Brown from when Parade was running.
Yes.
And apparently he had gotten close to Hal through working on Kiss of the Spider-Woman and on another Michael John LaChiusa show. And to the point where Hal Prince bought him a dog. Because Hal Prince already had 2 dogs, but he loved this dog. He and his wife loved this dog, and they named him Bernstein or Bernstein. And Hal Prince was so invested in the life of this dog that he would ask Jason to walk the dog across Central Park to go say hi to Hal and his wife. And so this initial discussion of, I want you to write for this project maybe, occurred on one such walk through Central Park, where Hal was like, hey, next time you take Bernstein over, we need to talk about something.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
I love it.
And Jason Robert Brown said, Hal, it's about dogs. Have you guys seen that clip? That's Hal talking about cats.
Yeah.
And he's talking about Andrew Lloyd Webber talking to him about cats or something like that. And he's like, Andrew, what's it about? What is this show about? And Andrew Lloyd Webber apparently said to Hal Prince, Hal, it's about cats.
That is funny. Music and lyrics by J.R.B. In case you don't know, that's Jason Robert Brown. A book by Alfred Urey. Music was orchestrated by Don Sebesky. And then it features hymns by Lowell Mason and songs with lyrics by William Cooper, the poet. And then it was conceived by Hal Prince.
I hate this music.
Ba-dum-tsh.
What a bad score.
Ba-dum-tsh.
This score is no good.
Ba-dum-tsh. Okay, that was your 3. That's your comedy in 3s.
Do you want to hear something fascinating? Jason Robert Brown has had, 4 or 5 shows on Broadway. We could cover almost any of them on this podcast, and only one of them not, and that's because it just got 106 performances.
I'm sorry, what?
Which one is that?
13 is the only one to have cracked 100, and even then
You're
just barely.
kidding me.
Isn't that fascinating? Jason Robert Brown, considered by many one of the best and most prominent musical theater composers of the 21st century, has only had one show that lasted over 100 performances on Broadway. And despite that, he's got 4 Tony Awards or something like that.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, right? So, all of this to say, and all those very funny jokes I was just making before aside, I think this is one of the best scores of the last 30 years.
Ooh. Can you pinpoint a few reasons why you feel that way?
Absolutely. I think this driving percussive style that Jason Robert Brown was one of the early pioneers of went on to affect many Broadway composers, particularly... Oh, wow, this is embarrassing. Daft, cut this out because I'm blanking on the names of Dear Evan Hansen's composers.
Pasek and Paul.
Oh, yeah.
Went on to influence many modern Broadway composers, especially Pasek and Paul, who are, I would say, the golden boys of musical theater in this day and age.
And even film at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Both the arranging and the orchestration is great. The arranging, isn't credited specifically on the Internet Broadway database, but I believe it's also done by Jason Robert Brown, who does a lot of his own arranging.
That's good to know.
The vocal arranging especially is just, I think, some of the best I've ever heard. I think I would go on record and say that. I have no problem saying that.
Even better than American Psycho?
The vocal arranging is the second best I've ever heard after American Psycho. And the orchestration is incredible as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Elliot, you're one of... I have a great deal of respect for you as a musician. We went to music school together, at least a little bit. What do you think of this music?
I think it might be JRB's best score, potentially.
Yeah.
It's interesting because he's done so much since.
Yeah.
But I always find myself coming back to Parade because it feels like that's where he kind of found a way to integrate all of the different ideas that are there in his other work. And specifically, some of the motivic writing, right? So many, the use and reuse of different melodies throughout the show is insane. To the point where I didn't realize until after I had done the show, after I had obsessed over the show for 4 or 5 years, that Leo's first solo song, How Can I Call This Home, where he's talking about feeling like a fish out of water.
From Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
Is this home?
Yeah, exactly. Is this home? And then, of course, his end of the first act statement at the trial, It's Hard to Speak My Heart, my repertoire from when I was a teen, is the exact same melody.
Yep.
Slightly reharmonized, just at a different tempo. But it's the exact same tune. And then, moreover, the fact that the first little pattern we hear in the show at Old Red Hills of Home, the accompaniment goes da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and that is, of course, the melody to the soaring love duet in the end of the second act. All the wasted time, all the million hours.
Oh, it's so good!
It's incredibly layered, stupidly layered.
Lucille at the very end. Does she recall Old Red Hills or does she recall How Can I Call This Home? She recalls one of the first 2 songs.
She does Old Red Hills.
Yeah,
She does Leo,
totally.
oh Leo.
And the Shema.
The Shema.
The Kaddish at the end as well. Is Old Red Hills. It's the through line, the thread of that throughout the score is remarkable.
And you wonder how much of that is how much of that is a young Jason Robert Brown, and I'm not saying this to disparage him at all, but rather to offer an explanation for why his first big score is his strongest in a lot of ways, both to Elliot and me. I wonder if a lot of it is having Hal Prince there. That's such a Hal Prince thing. Things that, I mean, Hal Prince is not a composer, but has worked with so many brilliant composers. And so many of Hal Prince's shows use motivic writing so strongly.
And I think part of it also comes with being younger and a more emerging artist, is I think people feel a little more free to make big, strong choices like that when they're not so much under a microscope yet.
Or when they don't know any better.
Right. Well, and when I remember watching some backstage interview when they were getting ready for Bridges of Madison County. I said that weird. Bridges of Madison County.
It's because it's how we all feel about that show. That's why you said it like that.
You mean the Bridges of?
Yeah, Bridges of
Madison County.
Bridges. And, but yeah, he was talking about that show and how he wanted it to be his Traviata. And I thought, like, there's no way if you build it up in your head that it has to be your, like, magnum opus, your number one thing, there's no way you can possibly reach that. Versus Parade, he was in his, mid-20s?
Early 20s.
I imagine he's just like, my goal is to go to work and not be fired by Hal Prince. Right?
Like, literally,
you
right?
know?
Yeah.
It really simplifies things.
All I've written up to this point is a collection of songs I'd written over the past 15 years of my life as a cabaret. And now I just need to go to work and not get fired by Hal Prince.
Well, also, Hal Prince, which we'll talk about him a little more later, but he does mention in interview after interview how much he loves finding new talent. It's like one of his favorite things.
Yep.
And so I think in him is this sense of mentorship because he had that a lot when he was younger. So maybe he just really has a knack for, mentorship and a clear vision of what he needs from a person, and he's able to draw that out no matter their age.
Oh, and there's no question he makes the right call here. If we look back on the 90s, on the rest of the composers who are Jason Robert Brown's contemporaries, like we said, Sondheim is just finishing up his real golden years, and people like Michael John LaCusa and Janine Tesori are writing nice stuff, but nothing that's sustained like Parade, you know what I mean? So out of 10 monkeys, how many Playbills does the music get?
Elliot, you're our guest. Why don't you go first?
I would give it a 10.
Yeah.
I'm giving it a 10. A piece of me wants to, never give a 10 because it can always be better. But I think, you know what? I'm going to go out on a limb and give it a 10.
I'm going to go just slightly lower than you. I'm going to give it like a 9 or a 9.5. And I don't fault you for a 10 at all, just because on this most recent watch and listen, some of because the music's divided into two categories, into hard modern musical theater and then kind of southern pastiche.
Yes.
And the southern pastiche stuff gets a little samey.
Yep.
So that would be if I would gun to my head, I had to draw a complaint, it would be that. What about you, Jill?
So you said 9.5, is that what you said?
Let's say 9.
Okay.
Let's say 9.
Great. So here is our first issue.
Okay. Oh, no.
Okay, so our job at this podcast is to try to figure out what went wrong.
Yep.
While I don't believe that the music is I shouldn't say anyway, but is super responsible for this flop, because it is gorgeous and intelligent and yeah, I love it. I think the music is stunning. I think that the home song, How Can I Call This Home, might actually be one of the issues with the play because it doesn't allow you to really deeply get to know or understand the character of Leo, and we need somebody to root for. We need someone to deeply be on their side. And I think that because the character of Leo is a little more closed off, I think,
what you're saying.
Yeah, it's so hard to articulate because I don't think that it's really anybody's fault. I just think that kind of that might be that moment that you're like, oh, I wish I just knew him better.
There is an interview with a young Jason Robert Brown where he talks about how much trouble he had cracking Leo's voice as a songwriter.
Yes, totally.
And how Can I Call This Home was the last song he wrote for the show, actually.
Yes, it is.
And now that you mention it, it's very fascinating because how can you call this home? I'll allow Elliot to talk about this more in a second as the person who's actually lived these moments on stage. But just upon examining it right now, off the top of my head, that song's mostly, it sucks here in the South. I'm unhappy in the South.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And it's, you know what, it's interesting because, doing the show, you don't want to look at your character with judgment, right?
No,
right.
Of course not.
Yeah.
But as, like, watching it and listening back this last time, I thought, like, God, he kind of sucks. And historically speaking, he did kind of suck. But the point was he was innocent.
Right.
And so they definitely don't embellish on his personality. And he really was a very dry and kind of cold human by all accounts.
And that was part of the problem, is his personality just didn't fit with this culture that he was in, and that caused undue suspicion.
Right.
And I was reading too, there's some opinion that that song also kind of casts this light where the show judges the South rather than like presenting a balance of things, right? The South is bigoted, it is bad, it is the worst. And it was interesting watching and hearing kind of a New York audience laughing at the jokes about the South, because I thought, yeah, that's how people in New York feel about people in Georgia. It's what they think. It's a confirmation of their biases.
Yes. And I want to hold on to exactly what you're talking about now, because I think it plays into a lot of the reasons why Parade did not run past 85 performances.
Okay, but before that, Jill, what's your rating?
Sorry.
No, this is so fascinating.
I feel like I really diverted, but I think
it's very important.
I needed to address that because it is technically part of the music.
Absolutely it is. Mm-hmm.
But I would agree it's a 9 for me. I think the orchestrations, the arranging, all of it, brilliant. We get from A to B in all the songs. I love it. 9.
But what about the book? First of all, a little bit of fascinating context on the book. Alfred Urey has a personal connection to this case, to this historical case.
Oh, it's so fascinating.
His great uncle owned the pencil factory where Leo was a manager, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That was the site for all of this occurring. So Alfred Urey talks about in interviews how this case has always been a part of his life, how his family will leave the room if it's ever brought up or if it's ever discussed, and how writing the script for this musical was almost an act of catharsis for him in examining this story. And I think that's very fascinating.
I think he talked about, in an interview, he talked about how in his household, because he grew up there, obviously, in Georgia, and in his household, people sort of didn't talk about it. They didn't want to. And he would bring it up and they would avoid the subject. And so I think having a person who is so closely related to these circumstances in this story, it was a very wise decision.
So do you like the book? Either of you, do you like the book?
My thought on the book is it's fine. I don't know. Yep. I didn't feel strongly about it. I remember in doing the show, I didn't have any words that I had to say that I felt awkward about saying. It all felt like a person talking.
You weren't frustrated with the book ever?
Yeah, and I didn't have too much trouble kind of getting from A to B. All of the beats made sense.
Great.
But as far as scenes that blow me away or moments of dialogue that, make my jaw drop, I don't know that's there for me, if it needs to be there.
It's definitely hard to say because, first of all, there's not a ton of book. Most of this show is music. And definitely the music takes all the big moments. The book never really gets the big moments.
Yeah. The book is there to get us to the next song.
Yeah.
Totally.
But I think, like Elliot said, the judgment of the Southern folk is evident in the book, commenting on it. Those caricatures of the people and the DA and the governor.
Yep.
Like those kinds of characters really are recognizable, but also don't afford us a lot of, depth, I guess, to accompany that music. So I think actually the book might be one of our big problems here.
I was going to bring this up because if when we talk book, we're also talking play structure, which in the past we've kind of lumped that in with that. Mm-hmm. This play, as it appeared on Broadway, has some structure problems. Namely, the character of this reporter.
Oh, yeah.
There's this reporter who appears early on in Act 1. He's a really bored reporter who's been assigned to the Atlanta, Georgia beat, and nothing ever happens, and he's frustrated. And then, boom, a big murder happens. This is music to his ears as someone who just needs something to report on. And he sings a hell of a song, just as a song in itself. It's a great song. And is one of the characters that fans the flames towards igniting negative public opinion against Leo Frank.
Mm-hmm.
And then he disappears for a long time.
So long.
And pops up a little bit at the top of Act 2 and never appears again.
Yeah, he kind of takes a turn as a surprise narrator for like, what, maybe 20 minutes at the top? Yeah, not even.
2 seconds. Yeah, but a very prominent 20 minutes.
Oh yeah, he has a whole sequence and then he goes bye. I think he comes back at the finale to give Lucille her Leo's wedding ring.
Oh sure, that's
But
right.
other than that, you don't come away from that show remembering his name.
I literally cannot remember his name, and I watched it less than 24 hours ago.
I think they were trying to do that thing where they're like commenting on how the media and the mob mentality and the, that whole thing. I think that's maybe the character they were trying to use to make that device happen. But the issue is that, like, I think that structure works way better in satire, like in Chicago.
I agree completely. Correct me if I'm wrong, Elliot. This show went through a bunch of revisions after its time on Broadway.
Oh, yeah.
And you actually ended up doing this revised version, not the version that we saw.
Yeah, so I know they did a few revisions for, they did a national tour following the closure on Broadway, and then they did a production at the Donmar Warehouse in London in, I think, 2007.
Mm-hmm.
And it was directed by Rob Ashford, who's a big name in Broadway, though oddly for, more lavish musicals, things like Thoroughly Modern Millie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that Donmar Warehouse production, they went under some pretty big, drastic rewrites, including writing out a lot of that Britt Craig reporter character, cutting his first song entirely.
Who is that his name?
But yeah, so the new version does kind of drop the newspaper narration to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
And loses a couple of great songs, but I think probably gains a lot narratively.
Yeah, and it gains a couple good songs
really?
too, which is nice. There are a couple replacements that are nice and some that are just fine. In the end, they tighten the show. It's shorter, it drags less, and it's a little more clearly focused on Leo and Lucille, and I like to think that Leo's a little more sympathetic.
Oh, fascinating.
But barely.
Fair enough. So, what we're judging, though, is the book that appeared on Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
So, out of 10 monkeys, how many playbills do we give the book?
I mean, if I had to take a leap, I would say I'd give it a 7.
Ooh.
Because I think it could obviously have been much better and solved a lot of problems for the show. But also, I think we've all read books that were far, far, far more in need of revision than this.
Yeah.
Like, I'll take this one, you know?
That's a great point. Yeah.
Totally. I'm less generous than you. I'd say 5.
Okay.
I think if we're lumping structure problems in with the book as a judgment call, I think the structure of this show is one of the big challenges of this show.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a better structured book would have led to a longer life for this show and a better audience experience. I love this show to death, and I was having trouble staying focused, giving it a watch all the way through last night.
Yeah.
And that's someone who already not only loves the music, but has a deep nostalgic connection with the music. How can a new audience be expected to stick with that and not lose their attention, you know?
So 5, is that what you said?
5 is my rating, yeah.
I actually fall in the middle of the two of you. I would say about a 6.
Great.
I agree with both of you on that. And I also found this really funny quote from the Variety review of Parade from 98. The writer was Charles Isherwood. Charles writes about the book, quote, Leo is taken into custody, parentheses. We never learn much about why he's the natural suspect. Perhaps the beat cops had already read the musical's book. End quote.
Like, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, huh. Yeah, no, that's a plot point we should maybe clarify.
Yeah.
Because in the real case, there's some pretty damning testimony or I guess statements that get introduced before the arrest, if I'm not mistaken. Whereas in the play, we see them on the stand, right? Or is there a song where they're being interviewed? I can't recall.
There's some interview early on.
But it's mostly the stand. It's mostly the testimony comes from the stand.
Right. That we see in the show anyway.
Yep.
But yeah, I just thought that was so funny because I hadn't even thought of that. I was just like, oh yeah, because it's theater and like just arrest him because we need to get the show moving.
Yep.
But like, but why? So that's why I feel we're at a 6. Because there's a couple of like tricky moments where I'm like, we could have used more clarity. And then a couple of really lovely, well fleshed out scenes. Especially I think between the Lucille and Leo.
I agree.
And you know what? Their last scene together especially is like,
Oh.
Their scene leading up into All the Wasted Time is a mainstay of musical theater scene study classes the world round, and it is for a reason.
And it is for a reason, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Yay, we did it. We talked about the music, the lyrics, and the book.
All right. Well, let's figure out what else was going on here. Let's talk about the direction and the choreo.
This show was directed and conceived by Hal Prince. If we don't know who that is, we have a problem.
A little nobody. Go look up Hal Prince. Thank us later. He's a really cool dude.
Music direction by Eric Stern. It was choreographed by Patricia Birch. The assistant MD was Henry Aronson, our pal.
Oh, dear friend of the podcast, Henry Aronson. Lovely man.
And the final creative team credit was the assistant choreographer, who was Rob Ashford. So now we have this sort of through line of Rob Ashford's connection to this show, but also it was his first credit as an assistant choreographer, because up until this point he was like a swing and a dance captain, but this was his first creative team role.
He's a dear friend of the podcast.
Yeah.
Dear friend, dear colleague. Yeah, good guy. He lent me money once. It was great.
Oh wow, that's so nice of him.
When I really needed it. It was, what am I doing? Let's keep going, please.
Anyway, those are the creative team members. Also, I always should say 1,000,001 assistants who are instrumental in any show.
Kicked ass and are wonderful.
Yes. Let's talk about the direction. Paul, you mentioned before on this podcast that it's not something that you super know about.
I have a hard time judging direction with anything other than very broad strokes. This show seems very static.
Yep.
And we don't get as deep into a lot of the emotional depth of the characters as I would like. We delve into a ton of stuff, but never quite, I think we've started to discuss this already, especially with Leo Frank, never quite into more than I'm unhappy to be living in the South instead of living in Brooklyn. I'm very grumpy with everyone from the South, and virtually everyone from the South is one step away from being like a mustache-twirling, Snidely Whiplash-style villain.
Yep. No,
Yeah.
I think that's definitely an observation, an accurate.
It is absolutely an observation.
That's
Participation credit goes to.
Yay! Good job, Paul. Elliot, is there anything that you noticed about the direction that you wanted to call attention to?
Well, I mean, to take a ride on the static train for just a little bit, I did notice, and this ties in a little bit. This ties in a little bit to the design, but I noticed halfway through the trial scene that they had ceiling fans on stage. That they had set ceiling fans, because I was like, what's interfering with that light there? What's happening? And I realized, the reason my eye is drawn to the set ceiling fans is it's because they're the only things moving on the stage. Yep. Which, you know what? Which props to the designers for putting that in. And
props to the designers. That's a funny thing to say.
And I don't know what you do with it, because on the other hand, when in a lot of the dancing moments, I felt like, should we should we be dancing?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, does this mob need to dance?
Yeah.
Like, do we need to dance with the flames? Like, is
Yeah.
that the moment?
That's so funny to me because there was other moments where I was like, man, we're just sitting here. It sounds incredible, but like I could be looking at my phone and I'm still getting the same thing. Could we move a little bit more?
Right.
A lot of movement where you didn't need it and a lot of static where you needed movement.
And you know what? I think part of this has to go towards the scale of the production, because what's
Yeah.
changed about Parade, in addition to just, changes to the book, is it's a much more intimate show now. They added a lot of role
Right.
doubling. It's a small, medium cast musical now.
And that's how it should be.
It's absolutely how it should be, yeah.
So I think you're right. I think that it was just too much for what could be a more pared down show. Because, like we've said, the music can really support your experience with the show. You don't need really a lot of extras. I also, there's like a moment where there's like bleachers that show up.
Mhm.
Yes.
I think it is for the mob song. When the what is it?
When the flood comes.
When the flood comes.
They've
that
had
song.
these bleachers in play. They were like the stands for the courtroom.
We already saw this the year before in 1997 with Sideshow. The bleachers don't work. Can we just stop with the bleachers?
Maybe they were the same bleachers.
Oh, good
Have you
point.
thought of that? Maybe they, in a money-saving endeavor, saw Sideshow and went, man, those bleachers work, hey? Jeez,
I have
they
this
work."
really, really funny image in my mind of Hal Prince doing like a tour of the theater they're gonna do Parade in, and he trips on something and it's like the corner of a bleacher, and he's like, this is it. This is what we need to do.
Hal, it's about bleachers.
Oh, yeah. No, I agree. I think there's movement where we don't need it. I really, honestly, I love having a choreographer in the room, but I don't think choreography is the right way to go. I think it's musical staging, because I think with swipes, with transitions, that could have been a better use of a movement person. That's what I think. And of course, there's some really beautiful moments that Hal Prince directs,
Yeah.
some nice scene work, some effective scene work, but it's usually best when it's like two people in the scene.
Hot take from this podcast, Hal Prince is a good director. You know?
Yeah.
So there's,
Oh, yeah.
there's some expertise there that's just on show. There's no question.
Totally.
Is it safe to say that we're discussing direction and choreo in the same breath right now?
I think so, because there's really not much to say about choreo specifically, I don't think.
In that case, I wanted to mention a couple of moments, one direction moment, or I guess maybe they're both kind of musical staging and choreo moments that I really loved.
Okay.
One was the scene leading into the courtroom, People of Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
Jeez, it's incredible. Everything about it works. You just see it and you're like, this is what the whole show could have been. And it would have been the next Les Mis.
Right.
And then Come Up to My Office.
Yes.
Yeah, my favorite.
It's three women describing situations that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Or misrepresenting situations where Leo Frank was inappropriate with them.
Correct. In the workplace.
It not only features a really about-face turn from Brent Carver, as he portrays this fictionalized version of the character, and the choreo just works so well.
Yeah. You know what? That's a great point.
There's these two moments where everything just kind of clicks into place, and you're like, oh, geez, it's brilliant. It's incredible.
I agree. I think that is a wonderful example of when it works. I love that moment.
But I think more than that, and I'll be the first to give my rating then, out of 10 monkeys, I would give the direction and choreo, like I'd say 5, but it's even a stretch. I just feel weird giving Hal Prince lower than a 5.
He can take it.
Going into this, I was like, how on earth can anyone give a bad review to Parade? Parade's an incredible show, because I'd only ever listened to it, is an incredible show that takes a tragic piece of history and humanizes it with beautiful music. How could you give a bad review to this? And then I watched it, and I thought, oh no, I understand, sure. The direction and the choreo just aren't working for it. So 4, I'd say 4 then. If we think that Hal Prince can take it, yeah.
Yeah. And Elliot, where do you land out of 10 playbills? How many monkeys do you give the direction and choreo?
I mean, if we're talking in terms of monkeys, it changes everything.
I know.
I wonder, I have a hesitation, and I'm going to continue my trend of being a little more generous with my ratings. Maybe because I don't have to do this every couple of weeks.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I'm gonna give it a 6, and here's my excuse. Is I think, as is the case with a lot of good creative team elements, I don't think good direction always necessarily calls attention to itself. I didn't have a tough time. I didn't have too many moments where I thought, oh, yikes, that choice, why? I didn't think, like, why is Lucille delivering her big number upstage center?
Right.
But it was, and so because of that, I wonder, maybe was this kind of sneaky, I'm going to get out of the way of the work direction that wasn't, seeking to call attention to itself as, look at this amazing bias I put the set on for this scene, or, whatever it is. So I think, so it's a 6 for me, 6 monkeys.
Yeah, I think that's generous and that's fair. Good for you, dude.
I like your reasoning. I think that's really good. I think that's a nice observation.
Thank you.
I'm gonna do a 5, I think.
We're just right in line this whole podcast. I go low, Elliot goes high, Jill threads the needle.
Is that a sports term?
Is it? No, it's a knitting term. It's a sewing term. You thread the needle.
Yeah, no, I know, but I think you use it in the context of, like, when something is, like, exactly correct.
No, Jill, use it in the terms of sewing. When you're sewing something together. That's what it is. It's a sewing term.
I think I've heard it used in hockey, so I associate it with sports.
You're thinking of hat trick or goal. Those are hockey terms.
I'm not. Oh, I was thinking of ice skating. Oh, that was so stupid of me. Yeah. Okay, now I don't even remember what I gave it, like a 5?
You gave it a 5.
Yeah.
And it's a very fair rating.
Elliot, I think I really understand what you're saying about not necessarily noticing the direction, and that actually might mean it's good. I think maybe just by comparison, I might have this idea of what Hal Prince's work is, and I think that when it's not what we've seen the most, like Evita, or, the big Weber productions, you sort of kind of go like, oh, he didn't do much, but actually, he probably did a great job. So 5 for him, 5 for choreo 2, mainly because I'm like, do we need it? Like, do we need full choreo? Can we just have staging?
Yep. I feel comfortable with those. Let's talk about design.
Scenic design by Ricardo Hernandez. Costume design by Judith Dolan. Lighting by Howell Binkley. Sound design by Jonathan Deans. And hair and wig design by Paul Huntley.
Everything's very blue, hey? Very blue.
Mm-hmm.
It's a blue show.
Everything felt really stark, I guess. Colors included.
It's actually very fascinating because I only have 2 notes here. One is bomb-ass set, and that's from the very top of the show.
Oh, okay.
And then I didn't write anything else because after kind of this initial reveal, because we've got the opening soloist, and he's kind of in this dark spot.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this big reveal of this of the set, and there's this projection of the parade, and it's kind of this awesome set, and it's kind of, there's some height going on, and there's almost this feeling of like metal girders and stuff, eh?
Yep.
And there's projection, they're projecting this parade, and I was like, even from this shitty camera bootleg I'm watching, I can imagine this would have been awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And that big tree, that big tree.
And this enormous tree, how did I miss that? It's an incredible, it's very striking.
Mm-hmm.
And then nothing else happens with it, and everything just stays very stark. So literally the only other note I have is very blue. So that is my contribution to the conversation. I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say.
I also didn't really notice the sets in a big way, but the sets came up in reviews a lot, and I noticed a lot of people talking about the big oak tree that's kind of always there on stage, and that it's supposed to be this constant reminder, because it's the first thing we sing about, right? The young soldier says, I've carved our names in the trunk of this tree.
Right.
So the tree is this symbol of the grand old South. And then at the end of the show, it is, of course, spoiler alert, where Leo Frank is hanged.
Yep.
It's supposed to be this big looming presence, but And maybe it was in the room, but on the grainy bootleg I watched, I didn't particularly notice it after the first scene.
No. And even if it's, because I after the bootleg, I went and I was able to find like a sizzle reel that they'd made in 1999 as well. You know, if we're talking big set pieces of shows, once again, if we're going to compare this to something like Phantom or Cats, and I think we have to because both Hal Prince and Live Ent are involved with this. You're always gonna, in a promo for Cats, you're gonna have the tire. In a promo for Phantom, you're gonna have the chandelier at some point. Like, you don't even see the tree, you know what I mean?
Nope.
It is not prominent enough as a design element to even be included in promo.
Maybe they were like, we want it to be a surprise.
Oh no.
Like, maybe they were like, we need a big wow moment when the curtain comes up.
we need these
people
tickets.
can't know.
We need these ticket sales to slow down. We can't get everyone in.
Yeah.
We need calm down, everyone. Everyone can see Parade.
My notes are,
Yes.
there's a big tree, a second level, some bleachers, a bed, and I think that's it. Like, it was very like, I was just having a hard time understanding, oh, that's it. That really is it. It's so hard to know when you're not there in person.
Yeah. It seems to me like the set design isn't pulling its weight and the lighting design is trying to overcompensate for it.
Good point. Good point.
And you know, I wanna echo myself a little bit that it's just such a huge space.
Yeah.
They're at Lincoln Center.
Yes, right?
And it's just a monstrously large stage for such a tiny show.
Right.
And like, what do you even do with like, what do you do?
Like, it's this tough thing, right, where Lincoln Center was one of the co-producers on this, if I'm correct, with Live Ent. As an organization, Lincoln Center is the perfect theater company to be involved with bringing this show to New York. But this specific space that they have to work with is definitely not the right space for it.
Yeah. Well, it is the right space maybe for the show they were doing, like the show they ended up doing.
Right.
But maybe what it's become, it's just, now that we know better, what serves this story best, which is like smaller scale, more intimate venue. I think we can look back on Lincoln Center and be like, oh yeah, that was huge. But maybe at the time, that wouldn't have been something that crossed their minds necessarily.
Yeah, they were like, this is going to be the next Kiss of the Spider-Woman. This could even be the next Les Mis or something.
Totally. There's even flags like Les Mis. Different flags.
There are.
Certainly
Absolutely.
not the same same flags.
And there's Brent Carver, like Spider-Woman.
Yeah.
Exactly. It could really go either way. So, out of 10 Playbills, how many monkeys are we giving the design? Elliot.
I mean, I'm gonna give it a 5. I think it could have served the story a little bit more and maybe popped a little more. It's a musical. Why not? That's my very uneducated opinion on the design.
No, I love it.
I'm going to say 6. Let's say 6. Because I did have that initial moment of like, oh, this is bomb. And then I never had that reaction again. But that initial moment is something.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. I'm gonna go 5.5. No, I'm just kidding. I think 6, but I'm only saying 6 because, again, in my mind, I'm just picturing Hal Prince stubbing his toe on some bleachers and deciding like that was the way they should go.
That's it!
I don't think it was like totally off the mark. Although our friend from Variety, Charles Isherwood, wrote that Ricardo Hernandez's attractive but gloomy sets are dominated by the heft of a giant, leafless, portentous-looking tree. Like, he did not like this tree. He was like, oh.
He was not in.
But I think it's striking. I think it's quite nice. So... Paul... Elliot, I'm having so much fun.
Most fun I've had all week.
And I would really love it if we could continue to have fun.
I feel like we've got at least another hour in us.
Does that mean what I think it means?
Tune in next week for more Parade with Elliot Lazar.
Woohoo!
Yeah, sure, guys, we can do a part 2. We definitely consulted Daphne, the producer, about this. It's fine.
Hi everyone, this is producer Daphne speaking. Thank you all so much for listening to Monkeys and Playbills, the show where we take a look at Broadway musicals that had 100 performances or fewer before closing. To learn more about the show, you can follow us on Instagram at Monkeys and Playbills Pod, on Twitter at Monkey Playbills, or email us at monkeysandplaybillspod@gmail.com. You can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/monkeysandplaybills. Monkeys and Playbills is proud to be a Village Conservatory for Music Theater podcast. Original music for the show is provided by Paul DeGers, and the show is produced and edited by Daphne Finlayson. Thank you all so much for listening, and join us next week where we take on
More parade, apparently.